Mr. Rentz was first, and then we'll get the water folks. Mr. Rentz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and council members, and especially the staff. First of all, this is the first time I've stepped up here on this. I want to commend the staff, like others have, for this side-by-side. I think it's a very valuable tool, very well put together. I think we all need to recognize that a heck of a lot of work went into putting this together. So I just wanted to clarify on that, and it'll be very valuable to us as we have the time, like the rest of you, to go through it and really study it. On the screening criteria, first of all, I like the way you're laying it out. I think that's great. I think, obviously, the biggest challenge is going to be with the third criteria, the bottom criteria on page 3, because we're talking about terms of art, if I can call it that. Significant impact, substantial impact. Those kind of become terms of art, and as I understand the process, the action proponent is the one that has the initial responsibility for making those determinations. And so that they're going to be the first ones kind of making that call. Is this a significant impact, and does it have a substantial impact? One thing that might help, because I'm assuming this is what your intent was, on 2, 4, 6, 7 lines from the bottom. It starts with change in existing conditions. I'm assuming you're talking about changes in existing conditions within the delta. Is that correct? And if so, that might help the person when they're doing their initial analysis to have that understanding. It says significant impact means a change in existing conditions that directly, indirectly, or cumulatively caused by the project. And I'm assuming that's a change in existing conditions within the delta that is directly, indirectly, or cumulatively caused by the project.
Yeah, I'll take a look at that, Mark.
Okay, I'm throwing suggestions out for you all to consider. The other thing is, if you look at the bottom of that page, again, it starts with the word negative, and then the parenthetical there is the e.g. a water management action. Excuse me while I turn the page. A water management action that would result in pollution of waters. That could imply to somebody who's reviewing that covered action determination that any pollution of the delta waters, yet somebody may be designing an action that does result in some pollution of the delta, but it's consistent with, let's say, a regional water board's TMDL or some sort of other things. So I'm wondering if there might be, again, to help the person doing the initial assessment, if there may be some way that language could be crafted to say that would result in pollution that exceeds water quality standards or whatever the right terms. I'll leave it up to your lawyers. As you know, by other agencies in terms of pollution or whatever. I'm just concerned that we get into this. You put 1 teaspoon of dirt into the water, ergo it is a covered action by that EG. So just a couple of thoughts.
Yeah, I was. I'm sorry.
On that, just to add to the question, I don't see Tom Zuckerman. Is he still here?
I think he took off.
Because isn't one of the comments from South Delta on that similar point that you have a pollution issue potential in the creation of a habitat. So, which is controlling here? You know, the goal of increasing habitat, or the covered action that would exclude a chemical that is a pollutant,
right?
Even though approved by the.
Or another example I could give you is, let's say you enter into negotiations with the California Department of Fish and Game to get a 1,600 stream bed or lakeside alteration agreement because you're putting some sort of structure in that alters the stream bed. That may result in some pollution getting into the water, let's say sediment, for example. Yet you reviewed that with Fish and Game, and they're comfortable that it's not going to have an adverse effect on their areas of responsibility. Does the fact that they've reviewed it, and let's assume that incumbent upon them in reviewing is taking into account achievement of the co-equal goals, advancement of the co-equal goals, does the fact that they approved that permit give you a basis for saying, de facto, I do not have a significant or substantial impact? I'm laying that out there because there are going to be a lot of situations where you've worked to get a permit, and and then once you've got a permit, or you're in compliance with the regulatory requirement, does that satisfy your not being a significant impact? So I just wanted to bring those forward. I think they're the challenge, a couple of the challenging issues where I think if crafted right, might actually provide additional clarity beyond what you have done, provided here for the person that's doing the initial covered action assessment.
Randy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Chris,
Don't go away, Mark.
just a follow-up question. It's almost become the term covered action is synonymous with you can't do it. And I almost get the feeling from the questions that Mark is asking that is a fear, that if it becomes a covered action, then you're not going to be able to do it. And I think the question that Mark just asked is just, it's simply a matter of that example you gave about turbidity and fish and game, et cetera, is just simply the part of the process that leads to allowing that project to move forward.
Right.
I want to make sure that, I don't think we've ever said it here, that covered action does not equal you can't do it.
Yeah, in fact, that I've perhaps not said it clearly enough here, but I've said it in other forums that 99% of the covered actions, maybe 100%, we hope are good projects. What we're concerned, what you're concerned with, are big projects in the Delta that are consistent with the vision that you've laid out. The projects should be good projects, and they should be consistent. We assume that they will be able to detail how they are consistent. So I think that, perhaps we got off on the wrong foot. This idea that we should fear, having this label. And I think a covered action basically is a big project in the Delta that's going to have a significant impact on the co-equal goals. And I'm glad Mark brought up the issue of helping to refine the language that we've laid out. And I think we'd be receptive to, redline suggested changes, but it all ties back to the definitions that we tried to provide with regard to the vision of what achieving the co-equal goals actually will look like. And that's what's going to help project proponents figure out whether or not their proposed actions have a significant impact. And again, it's a significant impact. It's not, a little bit of pollution. It's significant in its impacting the achievement of the co-equal goal.
When we get to GP1, the next policy, I assume staying in the draft Delta plan is the language that's in the fifth draft that says council acknowledges that in some cases, based on the nature of the covered action, full consistency with all relevant policies may not be feasible. In those cases, covered actions, in those cases, the council may determine an appeal covered action is consistent. I mean, that was the first attempt I think you made to try to create a situation where it's not if you violate any provision of anything in the plan, it's over. And so we did that, and that's staying in. That language is staying in.
I believe certainly
I'm
staff
all-
would propose
we
that
would
it
recommend,
stays in.
sure.
And
Well,
actually,
and that's because it doesn't appear here.
we assume that it stays in.
I
yes.
assume it's staying in. I just want to verify that.
Indeed.
Okay, because that then makes
Can I just
this-
follow up on Chris's point, Mr.
Yeah,
Chairman?
yeah.
Chris, I agree with what you're saying. Let me give you an example, and I think Ms. Marcus may be familiar with it given her previous life. When the State Water Board approves, a regional water board develops and the State Water Board approves a TMDL, part of the analysis that goes into developing that TMDL is that you're not going to have a significant adverse effect on the beneficial uses of water in that area. You can discharge up to that TMDL level, and they have already made a determination there's not significance. That list ultimately goes to US EPA, where the impaired bodies list, and then the TMDLs is subject under the Clean Water Act to final approval by US EPA. Now, they can defer as much as that authority back to the state. So the point I'm trying to make is, using the TMDL for example, if a sister agency has made a determination as what is significance and what isn't, and you're in compliance with what they've determined as significant or not, then can you not arguably say, therefore, I'm not having a significant impact or a substantial impact because I'm in compliance with. I'm just asking for that clarification because what's in the parenthetical implies that any pollution, would result in any pollution of the Delta water. So that's all I'm.
You might argue that there may be cases where you're going to be totally in compliance, but still the action you're taking has a significant impact on the Delta and would be a covered action. That doesn't mean you can't do it. And it's, as the chair pointed out, in response to, for example, South Delta's letter, which talks about mercury discharges when you build wetlands, what do you do about the fact that you're doing one thing that's encouraged and desired in the Delta plan, yet it causes mercury methylation? That's why we had that provision put into GP1 that says, the world's not perfect, and there are trade-offs, and the certifying agency, so if it was Fish and Game, whoever it is, needs to acknowledge those and then make a finding. Based on our best judgment, this is consistent with the Delta plan because it's consistent with the co-equal goals, even though we acknowledge that there are these issues with methylation of mercury when we build the wetlands. So I think that if we don't build that kind of flexibility in for agencies, then we're really failing in our job.
The only thing I'd say about the mercury, and then I won't take any more time, is the mercury example I think that Pat was playing out, that's not, correct me if I'm wrong, but that's not a discharge of mercury. That's a movement of mercury that already exists in the system based on the activity you propose.
Conversion is counted as a discharge because methylmercury is much more toxic.
Yes.
And so there are regulations, and
Yes.
it would cause problems. And it does fit within the TMDL, so it's a challenge.
Yeah. Just throwing those ideas out there for consideration. We'll probably follow up, Chris, with you and with our comments. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, sir.